Hello, sports fans, and welcome back to another brand new episode of Ball Games and Beyond. I am your host, Evan Groat, and as always, Ball Games and Beyond is brought to you by Sportsnaut.com. Please go out there and make sure you are following Sportsnaut on our YouTube channel. Make sure you click that notifications bell as well, and you can also follow the podcast, the audio version of the podcast, by searching Ball Games and Beyond on your favorite podcasting platform. All right, the topic for this week's show: the NBA Finals are wrapped up, and the Boston Celtics were crowned NBA champions this year, their 18th title in franchise history. And now NBA fans start to look ahead to next season. There's a couple of big events coming up in the NBA calendar. This week, you have the NBA draft and then NBA free agency, which is also a really big event on the calendar for the National Basketball Association. But this week, it's all about the NBA draft, and that is going to be the topic of this week's show. We're going to be talking about some of the top prospects in this year's draft and how they project to the NBA. We've got a couple of European players who are being talked about as possible number one picks in this year's draft. There isn't a consensus overall number one overall pick this year. You've got Alex Sars from France. He's a potential number one overall pick, and Zachary Richichet as well from France, another 6'7", 6'8" forward who is now starting to gain some steam late in the process. I'm also hearing Donovan Clingan, the big man from Kentucky, fresh off his back-to-back national titles. But again, overall, this class, there isn't a consensus top player. It's kind of viewed as a weak draft class, especially compared to some of the draft prospects we've had in recent years. There isn't the generational talent in this year's class. There is no LeBron James. There is no Anthony Edwards or a Kevin Durant, a Victor Wembanyama. You're not going to find those types of prospects in this draft. But there are a few very good prospects, especially coming out of the freshman class from the collegiate level. And so we're going to discuss some of those names with our guest here in just a few minutes. Cameron Salerno is going to join us, and Cameron covers college basketball for CBSSports.com. And I have followed Cameron in his work for quite some time now, and I recommend you do the same as well. He has his latest NBA mock draft available on CBSSports.com, so you can check that out. And you can follow Cameron on X at Cameron Salerno 1. Now, a couple of the names that you're going to hear us discuss. I just mentioned the potential number one picks. There's a couple other guys who I want to discuss. Dalton Knecht. Dalton Knecht had a tremendous career in college. He capped it off with a really great senior season at Tennessee, where he became one of the more prolific scorers in college basketball. I really like his story. He started out at a JUCO, transferred to Northern Colorado, and then ended up at Tennessee, where he really, really evolved and came into his own. And now he finds himself as a possible top 10 draft pick. I think he brings instant offense to the NBA level. His defense, he's going to have to work on that at the next level, like many of these prospects will have to do, but certainly he's a really good player. Kentucky's also got a couple really good prospects in this year's draft. Reed Shepard, one of the top three-point shooters in college basketball. He should hear his name called very early on in this year's draft. And then one of the players who I'm very interested to see where he goes, Zach Edey. Mixed opinions of Zach Edey. Where he may land, how high he may get drafted. Will his game translate to the NBA? Does he have the quickness? Can he guard the pick and roll that is used so often in NBA offenses? Big men in the NBA, that it has really evolved over the years. You think back to, the 90s big man versus the current era of basketball with Nikola Jokic. The position has definitely evolved, and it's more about athleticism, being able to guard and being able to shoot from the outside. You think about a player like Joel Embiid. So will Zach Edey's game translate to the next level? That's something we're going to discuss with our guest as well. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. You don't want to miss that. I'm going to take a quick break right now. I'm going to step aside. And when we come back, we're going to be joined by Cameron Salerno from CBSSports.com. All of that and more coming up next on Ball Games and Beyond. And welcome back to Ball Games and Beyond. Joining us now to discuss some of the prospects who are going to hear their names called on Wednesday and Thursday in this year's NBA draft is Cameron Salerno. Cameron covers college basketball for CBSSports.com. And Cam, thank you so much for giving us a few minutes of your time. Let's jump right into it. First, I want to ask you, I've been doing a little bit of reading about the draft class overall. I want to ask you, though, about the strength and the depth of the class. We don't have a Victor Wembanyama in this year's class. Some are calling this class weak. I'm interested to get some of your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say first off, I've followed the draft for almost a decade now, as far as, just maybe casually as a fan now to, covering the draft. And this is probably the worst draft I can recall since maybe 2013. Because in 2013, if you remember, Anthony Bennett went number 1 overall, and he's one of the biggest busts in the 21st century. And this class is really unique, though, because it has a lot of depth in the sense where you have a lot of guys who are maybe seniors or multi-year players who are ready to contribute. I really do like this freshman class. I've been following it, obviously, since these guys stepped on the campus last fall. I mean, Shepard is a guy who is ranked in the bottom half of recruiting rankings. That he was number 80 on 24/7 Sports, and he was the best freshman in the country. Won CBS Sports Freshman of the Year. Obviously, Jared McCain, I think he was ranked in the top 15. He had a really good freshman year at Duke. Rob Dillingham was a highly touted prospect, and now he's in line to be a lottery pick. So maybe this draft doesn't have the Wemby type player or the Anthony Davis type prospect, but I think there's going to be some hidden gems in the first round, or even the second round, rather, because with every draft, there's bound to be at least 2 or 3 guys who make a name for themselves. But I think with this draft, there's not really a clear cut number 1 guy. I know Alex Sarr has been mentioned as the number 1 player in the class. I know Zachary Richardson has been mentioned as a number 1 player in the class, and even dating back to a very long time ago, Isaiah Collier, who's point guard from USC, number 2 overall player on 24/7 Sports rankings, was a guy who came in the season as a potential number 1 pick, and now he's a fringe lottery talent as far as the latest mocks go. I really like Isaiah Collier as a player. I'm very surprised that he's kind of in that range, but just this overall class is really unique, and there's still hope that you can find a guy in the first round that can contribute to your favorite team.
Yeah, you just mentioned a couple of the names who are being projected to go number 1. So I'm going to put you on the spot right now. As you sit here today on the eve of the draft, who do you think is going to go number 1 overall to Atlanta?
I want to go with Zachary Richardson, but I will say there's kind of conflicting reports. I think Atlanta would like Donovan Clinton, but is he worth taking number 1 overall? Who knows? But there is a scenario maybe where they trade out this pick and they move back a few spots to get Clinton. I think his floor is somewhere in maybe the 5 to 7-ish range. I think a team like Memphis really covets him, who could use a center. They maybe might trade up to number 3 if Clinton doesn't go number 1. I'm going to go with Richardson, though. I mean, I personally wouldn't select him number 1 overall. I think there are a lot of concerns about his overall game, and if you put him in previous draft classes, maybe he is like more in the back half of the top 10 if you were to like slot him in previous draft classes as far as talent goes. I have Rob Dillingham as my number 1 overall player on the board. I know it's maybe an unpopular opinion, but I always trust Kentucky guards to get it done. I mean, there's been so many that have come out of that school in the last decade that really have made a name for themselves in the NBA. So when in doubt, trust a Kentucky guard to get it done. But I will go with the French forward. There's 2 of them, but I will go with Richardson at number 1.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been a pretty good recipe to go with some former Kentucky Wildcats. Now, because there isn't that surefire, top 5 guy here in the draft, do you think it's possible, especially early in the first part of round 1, that we could see more trades looking, teams looking to maybe add a pick or 2 or some future picks because there isn't that high end elite player there available?
Yeah, I think a lot of teams are trying to trade out their pick in the first round, whether it be in the lottery or the mid first round or even the late first round. I mean, there's also teams with multiple first round picks. The Jazz, I think, have 10 and 29. The Knicks have 25 and or 24 and 25. And so there's potential that they trade the picks. I know the Sacramento Kings have number 13. They've been kind of shopping that pick for a potential win now player. I mean, there's a lot of teams. I mean, Oklahoma City, who was the number one overall seed in the West, they have the number 12 pick because of trades they've made throughout the years. I mean, the 2025 class, I think, is going to be really fun. Obviously, there is a generational prospect in that class in Hoover Flag,
Yep.
and he's a guy who I think a lot of teams are going to covet. I think he's one of the best prospects I can remember in the 21st century. I think he's like not maybe in that Wemby and AD tier, but maybe slightly below it. So there's definitely hope that 2025 is going to be better. So maybe teams kind of take the risk and trade for maybe a 2025 pick. But yeah, I think there is going to be a lot of movement. I mean, but we always say that before draft night or leading up to the draft, there's always going to be trades. There's rumors that trades are going to happen. And then, most of the time they don't. So you never know what's going to happen on draft night. But I do hope for the sake of, the fun that we do get a few trades. And also with the draft being 2 days, I think there is potential for more moves to be made.
That's right. The draft is a 2-day draft now, round 1 on Wednesday and round 2 on Thursday, which should give teams a little bit more time to kind of look into possible trade scenarios, just like they do in the NFL with the 3-day draft. Now, through all your research, in your preparation for this year's draft, is there a player or two that you've pinpointed that you think should be able to step right in immediately and contribute right away on an NBA roster?
Yeah, the name I believe strongly in is Dalton Knecht from Tennessee. I mean, he is a guy who can come into the league right away and average 13 to 15 points. He's an elite shot maker. He can get to the rim. I mean, he had a terrific season at Tennessee. And he was a guy who played at Northern Colorado for a few years before transferring. So he's kind of in that tier for me of guys who can make an impact. Others off the top of my head, Devin Carter from Providence, who is a defensive-minded guard. He can make an impact right away. You have Tristan Da Silva from Colorado, who's also a kind of an older player who can also make an impact. And then Baylor Shireman at Creighton. I mean, he is an elite shot maker, one of the best three-point shooters in this class. So that's going to translate. I think he shot about 38% on over 8 attempts a game. And so that's really exciting. There are some scenarios where those guys are maybe mocked later in the mid first round or even the late first round that you can draft and, you can play him right away. But Knecht is going to be a guy who probably is a top 10 pick. I don't know where he's going to end up. I know Portland is a potential place at number 7. Detroit has also kind of been rumored to draft a wing like Knecht or even, a guy like Cody Williams, who was Tristan Da Silva's teammate at Colorado. So I think there's going to be a lot of mystery in this class. And I think when we're going to look back after Thursday night, we're going to say that a lot of mock drafts are wrong because this class is so varied and there's just so many different outcomes. I mean, I think we say this every year as far as mock drafts go, where, people have a pretty consensus lottery or maybe even guys who are surefire, quote unquote, first round picks, and then they end up going in the second round. I think more than ever, we're going to see that this year just because there's so many varied opinions. If you ask 10 people, give me your top 10 best players in this class, you'd probably get 10 different answers.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I too like the story with Dalton Kincaid, starting out at JUCO, transferring to Northern Colorado, and then finishing his career at Tennessee on a very high note there. You mentioned Reed Shepard as one of the players you really liked in this draft. Tremendous 3-point shooter out of Kentucky. Do you have a good NBA comp for him? Like, how can we project him in his career in the NBA? Who could we kind of point to?
That's a great question. I mean, I don't have a specific comp off the top of my head I can give him, but I know he's going to step in right away and be an elite 3-point shooter. He's a smaller guard. He's kind of a combo, point guard, shooting guard. So he's going to be, a smaller guard in the NBA. I mean, just think of a guy who can shoot really well and, is a really good playmaker. The defensive concerns I know are there, but I mean, I think they are for a lot of people in this class. So I don't have a specific comp for him, but I just know he's in the tier 1 of the best shooter in this class.
One of the other players that I find very interesting, I follow them in college pretty close, and of course that's Zach Edey. I mean, he had a tremendous college career. Um, I think back to some early mock drafts that I saw. He was in the middle of round 2, and now it seems like he's kind of snuck into the end of round 1, possibly. How do you think his game will translate to the NBA?
That's a great question too, because Zach Edey is probably the most polarizing player in this draft class. As far as maybe if you ask, like I said, 10 people, you get 10 different answers. There's guys who think Zach Edey should be a surefire top 10 pick, and there's guys who think Zach Edey should be a second round pick. So there's a huge varied draft range with him. And just looking at Edey as the prospect, he is a guy who I think I don't think he's going to start right away. He's not going to be an NBA starter for a few years. I mean, he's a guy who can come off the bench and play a role as a backup big man. He can't really shoot that well. I mean, he's a decent free throw shooter, which actually there are projections that if you do shoot well from the free throw line in college, that eventually may translate to the NBA. He's a back to the basket center. So if this was the 1980s or 1990s, that
Yeah.
could probably be a number 1 pick. Like
Mhm.
that's just the consensus. But as far as a college player, Zach Edey was the best player in college basketball, undisputed the last 2 years, pretty much. And so as a prospect, though, I just think he's going to have trouble because, like I said, his play style is a back to the basket big. I don't really trust him guarding, out in space. I mean, I think he can hold down the paint like he showed throughout the season and in the college game. But I just think he's going to struggle in that aspect because, he does have some athleticism to him. But I mean, it's a whole nother game when you try to defend pick and rolls and you're playing drop coverage as a big man. So I think that's where he may struggle. But I think if you were to ask me where do I think Zach Edey should be drafted, I would say probably somewhere in the middle to late first round.
Interesting. We're joined by Cameron Salerno this week on Ball Games and Beyond. We're talking NBA draft prospects, and you can follow Cameron on X at Cameron Salerno1. Another thing I have for you, is there a prospect that, again, through your research and preparation, that you feel like isn't being talked about enough and that you think, 10, 15 years from now, when we look back on all of these prospects, that they're going to have a pretty long, consistent NBA career?
Yeah, I would say Ron Holland is the guy for me. He was the number 1 overall player in the high school recruiting class in 2023 and played for G League Ignite. Kind of had an up and down season, but there are a lot of tools to like about him. He's a tenacious defender. He defends off ball well. Like he can get in passing lanes and get steals. He's athletic. He's a slasher. I know the concern about him is his 3-point shooting. That's something that can certainly be improved upon once he gets to the NBA. I think he's definitely a surefire top 10 guy in this class, but there are some mocks that have him outside the lottery, even maybe in like the late teens. So I think he's the guy for me that when we look back in about 10, 15 years in this class, I think he's going to be easily one of the top 5 guys because, I strongly believe in you buy high school talent as far as what was this guy like leading up into college? Like the talent is there for him. And if he just puts it together and goes to the right team and goes to the right system, I mean, there's a few teams I think he'd do really well in the Kings, the Lakers, the Bulls, the Trailblazers, some of those teams who have, mid or early lottery picks, even mid first round picks. So some of those teams would really fit him well. But at the end of the day, I think he has the tools to put it all together, and he's one of the most underrated players in this class.
Of course, I got to ask you about Bronny James, and I feel like maybe if his last name wasn't James, people wouldn't be talking about him so much. But, he made the decision to enter the draft and keep his name in the draft. It's come under a lot of scrutiny. Um, you know, was it a mistake in your opinion? I mean, to me, it's like, I don't see what the rush is. He certainly doesn't need the money. Why not stay in college another year? His year got started off with the heart condition. And, I think that kind of hindered some of his development this year. Why not stay in college one more year, develop, and then improve your draft prospects, for next year and make yourself a guaranteed first round pick? I just want to get some of your thoughts on Bronny James.
Definitely. And I mean, Bronny James is definitely not the best player in this class, but he's definitely the most popular and well-known prospect in this class. I think that's pretty easy to decipher just based off his last name and who his father is. But at the end of the day, I think he made maybe the right decision. I mean, it's either develop 4 years in college or 3 years or 2 years or whatever, and go to the NBA and jump into the NBA now gives him an opportunity to play with his father, LeBron, in LA. Presumably, if he goes to the Lakers in the second round or even the first round at number 17, which I would highly doubt that's an outcome, but you never know. I mean, if the Lakers want to make sure that Bronny's paired up with his dad, that could be the decision that they make. I just think he's a polarizing prospect in the sense where he does have some tools. Like, he's not just a scrub. Like, he has NBA potential as far as he can crack a rotation. He can be a winning player. He has high basketball IQ. He has some defensive skills you like. He kind of had regressed a little bit on his three-point shooting at USC. I mean, he was pretty good in high school and on the AAU circuit. So there are some reasons to believe that Bronny James could be a pretty decent NBA player one day, but it is going to take time to develop. But at the end of the day, like you said, like, he doesn't need the money. Like, he's doing this pretty much, I think, to play with his father in LA, which is totally fine. I mean, you look at nepotism is very prominent in the workspace. I mean, I look at it as far as, family members get their kids and their friends jobs all the time. And I think in some way it's connected to that. But I will say Bronny James does have, like I said, characteristics to be an NBA player. Like, he's not just a total, guy off the street getting to play in the NBA. Like, he does have potential to be an NBA role player. So it's going to take some time, but I think the opportunity to pair the two together in LA is, too hard to pass up.
Yeah. And certainly whoever does decide to draft him will have to have a plan in place for his development, and it could take some time, as you mentioned here. We'll get you out of here on this last question here. You already alluded to the 2025 class. I want you to just discuss with us a little bit, for those who may not be fully aware of this incoming freshman to Duke, Cooper Flagg, who you mentioned, and why he has people so excited. What are some of the things that he does well? Just give us a little rundown of Cooper Flagg. I saw some clips of him just this past week out there working out with some of his new Duke teammates. It looks very, very impressive.
Yeah, I mean, Cooper Flagg is incredible. I mean, he's the best two-way player in high school basketball last year, and now he's going to Duke, where the stage is going to be bright in Durham. So I just really love him as a prospect. I think he's a 3-level scorer. He's obviously has two-way upside. He's more of a kind of a modern NBA player. He can play the 3, he can play the 4, maybe even a little bit small ball 5 at Duke, but I think he's going to primarily be playing the 4. But I mean, there's just so much to like about his game. I mean, he's just a polarizing prospect. And like, I just want to emphasize enough, like, if there are still rules in place where high school players could jump to the NBA, I would comfortably put him number 1 on my big board ahead of every single player in this class. Like, he's that good. And obviously there's going to be hiccups at Duke. I mean, every single player goes through that phase once they enter college, but I will give it about 2 games at Duke where everyone is saying he's a consensus number 1 pick. But there also is a lot of other good players in this class too. Like, it's not just a one trick pony. I mean, Ace Bailey and Harper at Rutgers. I mean, 2 really polarizing players that I think are going to make an impact. And a lot of people are even discussing Ace Bailey as a potential number 1 overall pick ahead of Cooper Flagg. I don't believe that. I like Ace Bailey's game, but Cooper Flagg for me is he's an incredible prospect. And he just I don't want to say once in a generational, because I think that's kind of a loose term that people use. I mean, Wemby is a once in a generational player. Let's get that clear. Anthony Davis, when he's coming out of Kentucky, once in a generational player. But I mean, he's easily one of the best high school players I've ever seen. And I think he's going to be a consensus number 1 overall pick around this time next year.
Yeah. Well, he's going to have to wait 1 year, because this year is the 2024 class. And Cameron, I know you're excited about watching it Wednesday and Thursday night. We thank you so much for the time, and thank you so much for your insight. And make sure you go out there and follow Cameron on X at Cameron Salerno 1. Cameron, thanks again. We enjoyed your speaking to you.
Thank you.